over the next few years, the relationship between the UCW and the Post Office may have to stand up to a few knocks. For one thing, the Post Office will be under increasing pressure to make more money. It's obvious that this won't always be in the best interests of Post Office employees, but continuous industrial conflict won't be in their interests either. That's why the UCW and the Post Office have agreements which are designed to avoid conflict and enable disagreements to be settled as peacefully as possible. In this programme, we look at two of them: the procedural agreement for disputes and the agreement on optical character recognition machines. We also look at the procedure for going to an industrial tribunal. What union officials and representatives need is a step-by-step understanding of how they work. So, if the union goes into dispute with management, how is it sorted out? The purpose of the procedural agreement is to diffuse potentially explosive situations. The key to this is time, because the agreement works by breaking the dispute down into different stages, which are all subject to specific time limits. Let us suppose there has been a disagreement. Stage 1 of the procedure calls for full, free and frank exchanges between the parties concerned. They have 1 week to try and resolve the dispute themselves. But if that doesn't work, the procedure moves on to Stage 2. What happens here is that the two sides, the local management and the local union representative, have to write a statement of difference. In other words, they have to agree what the disagreement is about. If they can't even do that, they simply set out their separate views. The statement of difference is then sent to the regional post office headquarters and to the UCW headquarters. And for this stage, another 1 week is allowed. The next stage is more talking. Representatives of UCW headquarters and regional post office HQ meet to try and find a formula to reopen the local negotiations. They're required to make every effort to resolve the disagreement, and they have 2 weeks in which to do this. If they can't find a formula, that's the end of the line, and both sides will then act as they see fit. If they succeed, the procedure moves on to Stage 4. This takes us back to where the initial disagreement took place. On the basis of the formula agreed by UCW headquarters and regional post office headquarters, the two sides now have to resolve the dispute. They have 2 weeks, unless they agree on a different period for this stage. If they still can't solve it, one of two things can happen. Either the matter gets referred back to regional and UCW headquarters, but this must be part of the formula agreed in Stage 3, or it's the end of the line, and again both sides now act as they see fit. But preferably they will solve it, and the whole business can be concluded peacefully. So, to recap, Stage 1 allows a week of frank discussion to try to resolve the dispute locally. If that doesn't work, Stage 2 provides another week to write a statement of difference and send it to UCW headquarters and regional postal headquarters. In Stage 3, the headquarters representatives have 2 weeks to look for a formula to reopen local negotiations. And in Stage 4, there are another 2 weeks for the local negotiations to produce a solution. There are several other important provisions in this procedural agreement. One is that there is no industrial action until the procedural machinery has been exhausted. Another is that in emergencies, local management can make changes to the status quo, but they must immediately tell the local UCW representative why this has been done. And finally, appeals to national postal headquarters can only be made on points of national policy.
It's extremely important that we abide by the procedures set down in that agreement, because by doing so it will prevent chaos in industrial relations. We must also stick rigidly to the time limit set down in the agreement, and it's important to remember that this agreement has been accepted by our membership, and therefore we as a union have an obligation to abide by it. It will definitely have benefits for the members insofar that it provides for the status quo, except in cases of emergency, which are clearly defined, and most importantly, it will allow disputes to be settled quickly.
Optical Character Recognition, OCR. How does this machinery affect members' jobs? The agreement on OCR is based on the new technology agreement. It reflects the same kind of spirit, consultation and fair sharing of the benefits with no compulsory redundancies. OCR is to be installed at not more than 20 mechanised letter offices. This will lead to the loss of 300 jobs. However, the agreement states that these jobs will go in the course of normal wastage. There are to be no compulsory redundancies. Where savings are made as a result of OCR, they'll be shared out between the post office and postal workers. It'll work like this. Say Office A has an OCR machine, and say Office B, which hasn't, has bulk posting work which could be done more efficiently using OCR. Office B could transfer the work, say 1,000 hours worth, to Office A, where it might only take 200 hours to do using OCR. That's a saving of 800 hours, which will be paid into a local bonus pool at the agreed rate and shared equally between the two offices. The other main points of the agreement are that OCR machines must have 2 operators. The operators themselves must be postmen, although they may also be postmen higher grade. And finally, the post office is committed to marketing initiatives to get as much new work as possible to exploit OCR capacity.
The introduction of OCR will affect jobs, certainly, but not as many as was first assumed by many people. The use of OCR will make the post office much more efficient in handling its mail, and hopefully, of course, that will attract more business, providing more jobs. And in addition, the post office still has to be competitive, and the use of OCR will give it just that additional competitive edge.
Industrial tribunals. Although much of the work relating to a tribunal hearing is done at UCW headquarters, it's essential for branch representatives to have a clear idea of what happens. The first thing to grasp is the very wide variety of things that can end up as the subject of a tribunal hearing. The most common ones are probably dismissal and redundancy, but there are many others, such as trade union activity, racial and sexual discrimination, maternity rights, and issues relating to pay. If UCW members want to take a case to an industrial tribunal, the first step for the branch representative is to inform them of their rights. It's particularly important that they understand the time limits that are involved. In most cases, the application must be made within 3 months from when the dispute arose. For redundancy and equal pay, it's 6 months. It's equally important that the full facts are established, including any that are likely to be used against the member concerned. The next step is to fill in the application form and send it to UCW headquarters. At this stage, the union decides whether or not it's going to support the application in question. With limited resources, the UCW has to be satisfied that there's a reasonable chance of winning. If the union decides to proceed, the application form is sent to the central office of tribunals. Once the application has been received and studied, the tribunal body may wish to hold a pre-hearing assessment. But even if they decide that the case will be likely to fail, this doesn't prevent the applicant from going ahead. Once it's clear that the application is going ahead, it's essential for the case to be thoroughly prepared. It must be possible to prove that any information presented to the tribunal is factually correct. And for this reason, it's also extremely valuable to have witnesses to back up the union's presentation of the case. They can give factual evidence and evidence of opinion, which is admissible in a tribunal hearing. Witnesses need to be found and coordinated early on in the process. It is possible for them to claim attendance expenses. Witnesses can be compelled to attend by either side. The tribunal hearing takes place in a room like this. The tribunal members would usually consist of a legally qualified chairman, a representative of an employers' organisation, and a trade union representative, although not anybody connected directly with the case. Bill Tracy, formerly a UCW general officer, has sat on many industrial tribunals as a trade union representative. What, to him, are the key points?
Well, you've got a platform here with three people on it. The man in the centre is a lawyer, and one on each side of him is one from the CBI, and the other one is from the TUC. And that's the role that I normally occupy on the platform. When they arrive in the room, they will be seated on the two tables that's allotted to them, and they will then have an opportunity to make an opening statement if they wish. This is both the employer and the person bringing a grievance. Then they will be able to bring witnesses and give evidence themselves along with the witnesses, and of course they will be cross-examined, and of course members of the platform are able to ask them questions if they wish to do so, and the chances are that they will ask them questions at some point in the proceedings to clarify their own mind as to what is taking place. At the end of the case, both sides can make a closing statement which presents their evidence again in a way, but it's a closing statement going over all the things that they've said. Then both parties retire from the room, and the tribunal then arrives at a decision. That decision is conveyed to both of them if it's possible, and it isn't always possible. I mean, sometimes you need to meet again if it's a tricky case. And in that case, the decision will be sent to them by post. But on most occasions, we try to give them the decision at the end of the case. It can be that two members of the panel will disagree with the other one, sometimes quite often with the chairman. And in that case, it's a majority decision, but it still has the force of law, as indeed do all decisions. It's not a law court, it's an informal atmosphere, and while the courts themselves, the law courts themselves, are very formal with the judge in the robes or a magistrate or whatever, that's not true in a tribunal. In a tribunal, the evidence is extremely informal, and so are the proceedings. But at the end of the day, the decision has exactly the same force of law as a court of law. Well, my advice to the person that's coming to put his case to the tribunal would be to look as tidy as possible and presentable, so that the panel will be influenced at least by the fact that he does look at least a fairly respectable applicant to come before them. Secondly, when he's presenting evidence, and whenever the witnesses are presenting evidence, they should present their evidence distinctly and clearly, and always talk to the people on the panel and not to their own solicitor if they have one, or to the courtroom, but always talk to the panel, because they're the people who are listening for the evidence. And make sure that any documents which need to be presented to the tribunal as evidence are there before them, so that they can be seen, because that will be part of his evidence. I think those are the main things, really.
grounds for appeal are very limited. So with only one shot at it, the value of solid preparation can't be exaggerated.
It's important that members are realistic about industrial tribunals and how useful they are. Not every case, of course, can go to an industrial tribunal, and of those that do, we only win 1 in 4.
The procedural agreement, the OCR agreement, and the tribunal's procedure all represent different ways of maintaining stability and common sense in a pressurized industrial climate. That is what the UCW membership wants. So union representatives should understand step by step how these agreements and procedures work. Applied correctly, they provide a means of protecting the immediate and long-term interests of the people the union exists to serve.